We're very happy to have Ken White here, who's a graduate student at Claremont University and a member of the California Bar, and gives us legal advice from time to time, sort of. He's helping us to work out a lawsuit against San Bernardino County so we can start getting our ID cards. Ken came to our meeting and spoke this evening, and one of the things he talked about is how to handle the police, and actually an incident he had where he got to handle the police in San Bernardino last Valentine's Day, and I'd like you to tell the folks a little about that.
Sure. Well, the thing to do if you ever are in a situation where you're encountering law enforcement and you are a legitimate medical marijuana patient or a caregiver, the thing that you need to know is your rights, right? You have the right to remain silent and you have the right to an attorney. And those are your two rights. And if you're ever in a situation where you're in a police interrogation, you should assert those rights. Ask the officer that I want to remain silent, and that you also want to ask for counsel.
What do you do if the cop comes up to you and he just starts asking you questions right off the bat and never says, never tells you you have the right to remain silent, but he just walks up and he says, "Kid, start talking or we're going to throw your ass in jail." What do you do?
Well, you need to not be ruled by fear. That's the first thing to do. Fear is the spring of despotism, and in this country, we're not ruled by despotism. If you read your Declaration of Independence, that's the one thing we threw off.
Theoretically.
No, actually. No fear.
No fear.
The police do not have to tell you what your rights are. It's up to you as a citizen to know what your rights are. Your job is to be informed and to be active. And so the police won't tell you that you have the right to remain silent or that you have the right to counsel. But you need to know those things, and you assert that. And once the law says that once you assert your right to counsel, the police are required to leave you alone until you seek counsel, until you actually get counsel. So if you ask to be silent and if you ask to have counsel appointed and the police continue to talk, you should be aware that the police are violating the rules. They're doing things that they cannot do.
And that's not acceptable as evidence once it's established that you're waiting for counsel. Anything that they say or imply after that really doesn't hold weight in court anymore.
It would not hold up in court. So the thing to do is basically just to be patient. Your rights will be vindicated. Sometimes the wheels of justice move slowly, but if you know your rights, you don't waive your rights, the justice system will vindicate you.
So what happens if, say, a situation, maybe a young kid or something, doesn't realize what his rights are and blurts out a few things not knowingly to the cops and maybe, says a few things that might be construed as what was the word?
Probable cause?
Well, yeah, it might give them the idea that maybe they were doing something wrong. How would you deal with that, say, after the fact, if a person kind of blew it?
Well, I suppose, as we say in the law, the truth is your best defense. So if for some reason or another you can't remain silent, I don't know why you couldn't, but if you can't, here's what you need to know. The law says that you're not doing anything wrong if you have a serious illness and a doctor's recommendation to use cannabis. And that recommendation can be oral or it can be written. But if you have a serious illness and you have a doctor's recommendation, then a unanimous California Supreme Court in a decision called People versus Mower, came down in 2002, unanimous California Supreme Court says there is no probable cause. If you've got a serious illness and you've got a doctor's recommendation, you're not breaking the law in the state of California. And so if you're in a situation where you meet the police and it's not a friendly situation and you're afraid that the police are stepping on your rights, ask to remain silent, ask for your attorney. If that doesn't work, remind the officer. You can be unsilent for a moment and then you be silent after this. You remind the officer that unless the officer can articulate a fact that suggests your possession of cannabis is not for medical purposes, they're duty bound to release you and let you go. They simply have no probable cause to subject you to criminal sanctions. Unless they can say, hey, you're at a party, you're drinking alcohol, you're using your cannabis for non-medical purposes, different story. But if you're a true, legitimate patient, meaning you've got a serious illness, and that's not defined by the police, it's not defined by elected officials, it's defined by doctors. We do not get in a situation where we as the people say, hey, that person's parked in a handicap spot. They don't look sick to me. You're not a doctor. You don't make those diagnoses.
Wasn't that the justification the sheriff of San Diego made when he went down and busted all those dispensaries by saying the patients that were walking into the clinics didn't appear to him to look sick?
Yeah.
So he thought they were using it for non-medical reasons, and that was his justifiable cause.
Yeah. And unless he's
Pretty
an MD,
flimsy.
I don't know how he's making those kinds of decisions.
Well, I don't think he could qualify as an MD. Isn't he practicing medicine without a license?
That would be getting close to it.
Pretty close.
Medical decisions are to be made by doctors, not by elected representatives, and certainly not by the police.
And we have an expectation of privacy in that regard. And the police don't have any business trying to tell us what's going on between us and our doctors.
Yeah, we are expressly protected, our privacy is expressly protected by the Constitution of California in Article 1. And I recommend, if you haven't read Article 1 of the Constitution of California, open it up and read it. In there you'll see that we're born free in this country. We're not born subject to the government, we're born free, and because government is a necessary evil, people don't get along, we need to have an arbiter of our disputes, so we give up some of our liberties to the government, but we don't give them all up. We're born free. And so we're born with privacy rights, we're born with free speech. Another way to say it is, the First Amendment to the United States Constitution, it doesn't give us the right of free speech, it protects our right of free speech. And that's a fundamental distinction that every American needs to understand.
Very good.
And if you find yourself in trouble with the cops, remember, you have a right to remain silent, a right to an attorney, and the police should not. That was the thing about the Moore decision that you brought up. A closer reading is police can't even arrest you in relationship to the Moore decision if you have a legitimate medical need for your medicine and you're not doing anything that's outside of that need.
Yeah. Unless the police, again, can point to facts that suggest your use is non-medical. And so, well, again, what would that be? Well, if you're in a party environment, if people are drinking alcohol and joking and laughing around, well, then maybe it's not medical, right? But if you're in a situation where it's under a doctor's supervision...
Unless you're in a MAP meeting and...
If people are in a situation where they have a serious illness and they're using, it's what is it being used for? Is it being used for medical purposes? Then it's medical. If it's being used for non-medical purposes, then it's not medical, and that's not protected. But people with a serious illness should know that you're not breaking the law. You're not a criminal.
Well, Ken, that's great. Thanks for finally coming on our show. You know, we've been trying to get Ken to come on the show for a long time, and it's great that you finally came on. And if ever anybody out there runs in foul of the law and they need some help and some advice, call Ken. He can help you out. Thank you again for coming on the show.
My pleasure.